Hello, welcome back to Catholic Reboot. We're going to continue with our catch-up series on the saints, and so what we're going to be working with in this episode is Saint Hermegild, Saint Justin, and Saint Anicetus. To start, we have Saint Hermegild, and I had made reference in the previous episode about how some of these saints were existing at the same time, and you're going to hear it with this saint. Saint Hermegild was a martyr that died in 586. Um, the actual king of the Visigoths was someone by the name of Leovigild. He was considered an Arian king because at that time the Arian heresy was widespread through the church, and so those true Catholics actually were in hiding at that time until the actual Arian heresy was put down. Now, the King Leovigild had two sons, Hermegild, which is the saint we're speaking about, and Reckard, who were both reigning jointly with the king. Now, all were considered Arians, but Hermegild ended up marrying a what they call a zealous Catholic, who was the daughter of King Zibert, the king of France, and by the example she set for him, he was converted to the Catholic faith. Now, his father, once the king heard of the news, denounced him as a traitor and marched to seize him. So, Hermegild had tried to rally the Catholics of Spain to his defense, but they were too weak to make any kind of a stand. And so, after 2 years of this kind of fruitless struggle, Hermegild had surrendered and was assured of a free pardon because of his surrender. But once he was in the royal camp, the king had him put into fetters. Now, fetters is a chain or a manacle used to restrain a prisoner. They usually placed it around their ankles. And then he was cast into the dungeon at Seville. So they tortured him at first and then tried to bribe him to shake his faith. But Hermegild had written his father, the king, and basically told him that he wanted nothing to do with the crown uh, of the royal blood, and he would rather walk away than betray the truth of God. So on Easter night, an Arian bishop entered his cell and promised him that if he would allow the bishop to provide him communion from his hands, that he was almost assured that Hermegild's father, the king, would pardon him. Hermegild was indignant and rejected the offer and knelt with joy for what they call the death stroke, praying for his persecutors. They say that night when he was being martyred, there was a light streaming from his cell, which told the other Christians, the Catholics, that were keeping a vigil nearby, that he had actually been martyred and won his crown in heaven. Now, King Leovigild, on his deathbed, was changed somewhat interiorly, right? He had been a witness to the miracles that had occurred after Hermegild's death, and he told his other son, who was the successor, Reckard, to seek out Saint Leander, um, whom he had also persecuted. And Reckard followed Hermegild's example and said to the king that he himself had to be received by the bishop into the church. So Reckard was converted to the true faith, the Catholic faith, gave up the Arian heresy, and his father, the king, did not have the same, say, courage to actually renounce the Arian faith. But after the father's death, the new king, Reicard, did everything he could to end the Arian heresy and bring the entire nation of the Visigoths to the church. It is said that St. Gregory said, "Nor is it to be wondered that he came thus to be a preacher of the true faith, since he was the brother of a martyr, whose merits helped him to bring so many to the haven of God's church." So that is the story of Saint Hermegild. We're now going to discuss Saint Justin. His feast day is April 14th. He too was a martyr. Justin was born to what they call heathen parents in Neapolis in Samaria around the year 103. He was well educated and he studied philosophy, but was always with this one objective, that he might learn the knowledge of God instead of just philosophy. So, struggling with that, one day while he was walking along the seashore, meditating on the thought of God, an old man met him and questioned him on the subject of his doubts. And he made Justin confess that the philosophers taught nothing certain about God. And he told him of the writings that inspired the prophets of Christ, whom they had been announcing. And he told him to seek the light and understanding through prayer. With this kind of a zeal for the faith, he traveled to Greece, Egypt, Italy, and then gaining many to Christ as he did so. At Rome, he sealed this testimony with his blood, so to speak, surrounded by his disciples. In other words, he became a martyr. Do you think, said Justin to those disciples, that by dying you will enter heaven and be rewarded by God? And the response was, "I do not think, I know," right? So there was just this pure fortitude to rather seek martyrdom than not to follow Christ in the footsteps of the true Catholic Church. Okay, last but not least is Saint Anicetus with the feast day of April 17th. He was a pope and a martyr. He died in 161. Saint Anicetus was the 11th successor of Saint Peter, so the 11th pope. He actually succeeded Saint Pius I, and Saint Anicetus reigned for 11 years. During that time, he had to combat the errors of Gnosticism, and you're going to notice that they're always combating some sort of heresy, right? So if we think we have it rough today with the modernism and liberalism of the church, they too had to fight against this. So Gnosticism was already rampant in these days, and Saint John the Apostle wrote letters to the churches of Asia, warning them of this heresy as well. So Saint Anicetus was visited in Rome by Saint Polycarp, who was the bishop of Sarmna, who consulted with him and in turn asked Saint Anicetus if they could resolve the feast of Easter in the Church of Rome. As Saint Irenaeus, who was Polycarp's disciple, said, they weren't able to actually find a solution to the question of the actual date of Easter. Apparently, in the East, or they call the Orient, there was a conflict with the West, which they call the Occident, which Pope Saint Victor would later settle. But regardless of this, they remain close friends, and Saint Anicetus' vigilance protected the faithful from what were called false preachers, who were Valentine and Marcion, who were trying to corrupt the faith at that time. Saint Anicetus established the tonsure, which is the cutting of the hair in a circular pattern and shaving it bald. And that was actually a sign of practicing ecclesiastical discipline. There's actually a letter written by St. Anicetus about this that is still in existence today. And he had written the bishops of the churches of Gaul and had explained how they should do this. Now, a side note is that the Roman Breviary tells us that he was a martyr for the faith 1 month after the death of Emperor Anicetus the Pious. Um, the other thing that we've come to know is that in 1740, um, uh, there are 78 martyrs named in the Roman martyrology, of which Saint Anicetus is listed in that. Um, the important thing to understand about these three saints is the early times they existed in the church, right? And again, the heresies they had to deal with and the great struggles they had to maintain the faith. So they're great examples. And again, I hope this helps you learn a little bit more about some of those early saints and martyrs of the church. So thank you very much.